Hey everybody, Jabik here. Thanks for clicking on this video. Let me explain a few things before we start. I wrote and recorded the vast majority of this video script back in 2020, right after the Demon's Souls remake came out. But it turns out editing an hour-long video takes a lot of time. Time I did not have back then. But after nearly 3 years, I went back and finally finished it. And this is the result. I hope you enjoy. Well, hey there folks, it's Jabik. You remember me, right? It's been a few months since Demon's Souls was released as a major PlayStation exclusive. Again, I'll freely admit that I'm a big giant mega fan of all things From Software. A big enough giant mega fan to purchase the PS5 on the day it came out just to play Bluepoint's gorgeous remake of 2009's Game of the Year, Demon's Souls. If you're looking for a biased opinion on whether or not it's worth playing, I say go for it. If you can afford it, or actually somehow acquire a PlayStation 5. However, you have to understand that you're paying for a game made 11 years ago with updated graphics. Top of the line, highly polished, best money can buy graphics, absolutely no question about it, along with some much needed quality of life improvements and several small pieces of new content. But underneath the hood is the exact same code as the original, just like what they did for the Shadow of the Colossus remake. If you've played the PS3 version, congratulations, you know exactly what you're in for with very few surprises. Whether the graphics, sound design, updated animations, and quality of life improvements are worth it is entirely up to you. I'd never personally pressure anybody into spending an exorbitant amount of cash on a new console for a single game, but as somebody who did just that, I don't regret doing it. However, there's not many games on the console that are worth playing apart from Demon's Souls right now. So if you're on the fence, don't hesitate to wait. If you're new to the series, I just gotta say, you're in for a real treat with this one. Demon's Souls was the very first entry in From Software's well-beloved franchise that spawned an entire subgenre of action RPGs. Just keep a tight grip on your controller and you'll be fine. Your playthrough will last anywhere between 15 to 40 hours, entirely dependent on your skill level and metagame knowledge. I had already beat the game in 2016 on the PS3, and I've beaten every other Souls game way too many times at this point. My accumulated skill and know-how is reflected in my playtime. My first playthrough lasting me 15 hours, my second 14, my third 12, and my fourth 7. I expect I'll play it many times more. Replayability is a staple of the series, and Demon's Souls is no weaker in that aspect. Would I recommend it as your first foray into these games if you're just curious or unsure about whether you'll enjoy it? No, probably not, considering it's by far the most expensive and there's no guarantee this game's unique, but admittedly archaic and convoluted game design as well as its brutal difficulty is going to be a good fit for you. As of 2023, I highly recommend you start with Elden Ring, as I think it's now the most beginner-friendly Souls game. If you already have a PS5 and those $70 are burning a hole through your pocket, or you just can't stop salivating at the thought of conquering such a detailed, intricate, beautiful, and challenging world, well, what are you waiting for? Permission? Go right ahead, my friend. This game is worth experiencing to its utmost. And that about sums it up for the review portion of this video. Now comes the long critique. Demon's Souls and its more popular inheritor, Dark Souls, as well as Bloodborne, Sekiro, and Elden Ring, are all considered generally to be a part of a larger series or even genre known as Souls games or Souls-likes. Obviously, the term originates with Demon's Souls. These games, with little exception, follow a strict gameplay formula, the core rules of which I'll try and lay out. 1. Levels or sections of the larger world are based around objects that act as checkpoints. In Demon's Souls, it's the Archstone. In Dark Souls, the Bonfire. 2. Dying sends you back to the checkpoint you last rested at. Death also takes away your hard-earned currency. 3. If you die or rest at a checkpoint, all common enemies are respawned at full strength. Each of these games is built around these very simple concepts. They have a lot more gameplay systems in common, of course, but every other mechanic, including many plot elements of Demon's Souls, Dark Souls, Bloodborne, and Sekiro, serve only to complement this aspect. Character progression is based on obtaining souls from enemies with the assumption you'll be killing the same ones many times over, as you get better at fighting them and move through the level, with the ever-present risk that you could lose them all if you make a mistake. Enemies deal a lot of damage, which increases the risk of losing both your character progression represented by souls and physical progression represented by enemies respawning and you being sent back to the start of the area. However, items you pick up and shortcuts you unlock persist beyond death, making level progression a slow trial and error process, getting a little farther and a little better each attempt. There are many traps and unexpected ambushes. You're going to make a lot of errors your first time through these games as you memorize attack patterns, try different tactics, build your muscle memory, and increase your knowledge of the game's combat mechanics. Attack animations for you and your foes are slow compared to other third-person action games. Each enemy and player weapon type have different animations that have to be memorized or consequences will be faced. You can't cancel attacks. As soon as you press the button, it's going to happen, regardless of whether or not you'd like to dodge an attack you only just saw coming. The game has a back and forth rhythm as you wait for your enemy to expose a weakness or exhaust their string of attacks whilst avoiding their assaults. You can block or dodge all day, but if you don't find an opening to strike back, the game's over. Vice versa, you can spam R1 as quickly as your fingers will allow, but it won't be much use if you fail to avoid the sword now lodged in your face. Stamina is a limited resource, quickly used up as you block, attack, run, and roll, and healing takes more than enough time to be hit. This means that you also have moments of weakness for your enemies to exploit. Each game also has an unforgiving counter damage system, where you take 20% more damage if you're doing an action like rolling, running, attacking, or when your guard is broken. But this also applies to enemies. This encourages a cautious and defensive playstyle for new players, while experienced ones are able to be more aggressive as they see exploitable weaknesses in their foes. With experience comes a knowledge of your limitations as well as your enemies, a tightrope walk that you must balance. Some people view trial and error gameplay as unfair or utilization of artificial difficulty. First off, artificial difficulty is an artificial term. It doesn't mean anything. It's not like there's such a thing as natural difficulty. All factors that contribute to a game's difficulty are completely arbitrary. The developers presumably could have chosen any number they wanted for the damage values or boss health pools. But what matters to developers is what's in line for their vision of the game and what feels balanced. Well-designed difficulty is hard to define, especially in a game where your death is tutorialized. Fairness or balance in this game does not involve how many times you're going to die in the process of learning. It's expected. You see this little square on the ground? It's technically possible that a first-time player is focusing, for some odd reason, on the ground, spots the pressure plate, infers that it is in fact a pressure plate, then activates a booby trap, infers once again that arrows must come from the smaller square down the hall, raises their shield, and celebrates the boons of their boundless intuition. However, the more likely scenario is that the new player walks down the narrow passage, activates the plate, gets and dies, now infused with the knowledge that the little ground squares correlate to arrow traps, and through further experimentation discover that raising a shield is the most reliable way to overcome them. Death, in this case, is a learning experience. There was a trial, an error was made, knowledge was gained. Was it unfair that the player wasn't warned beforehand about the consequences of stepping on the plate? No. A unique mechanic of the level had to be conveyed to the player. If they're smart, they won't make the same error twice. What would be unfair is if the game had a pop-up explaining that pressure plates refill your health bar. The player steps on the plate and it was true, the plate refills your health. The second and third do the very same thing. The fourth, however, activates an arrow trap, and the fifth causes boulders to materialize on top of them, killing them instantly. That would be unfair. Or more specifically, malevolently inconsistent. Situations where you can almost hear the developers say, "Ha ha ha, you died. We got you, didn't we?" Inconsistencies, such as in the hypothetical situation described above, wouldn't serve to teach the player anything. Overall, the Souls games are incredibly consistent with the rules they each define. However, there are instances of it scattered throughout the series, such as in the Capra Demon fight, the Bed of Chaos, and let's not even talk about Dark Souls 2. But there are few games that lay down the law and stick to it more than FromSoft's flagship formula. Trial and error gameplay is core to the series, but doesn't necessarily conflate with artificial difficulty or malevolent inconsistency, which is not a design philosophy of Demon's Dark Blood Souls Shadows Die Twice. Instead, the point is to encourage mastery over its mechanics. Hidetaka Miyazaki, the director of these games, has stated many times that the goal is not for them to be difficult, it's for them to give you a feeling of accomplishment when you succeed. Difficulty is one of many stepping stones used to achieve this goal. There's a goal behind it, and so in Demon's Souls the goal is to make you feel accomplished. Giving you a myriad of obstacles to overcome and letting you figure things out for yourself is the most effective way of doing that. When Demon's Souls originally released in the West, it garnered high praises from mainstream media outlets, a far cry from when Sony president Shuhei Yoshida called it an unbelievably bad game, going down in history as the first person to rage quit Demon's Souls. It sold like hotcakes in America and Europe, more than they were expecting. So what went right with Demon's Souls in specific? It came out at a time when first-person shooters and formulaic third-person sandboxes were beginning to dominate the industry, at a time where player freedom and skill-based gameplay were being stripped away in favor of more directed experiences. And it just so happened that there was a decent-sized niche of people who wanted something different. And Demon's Souls is certainly different. Precise, strategic combat, unforgiving enemies, and obscure mechanics are what make it unique. Its brutal difficulty and inscrutable world acted as almost a challenge to the biggest and baddest gamers out there to come together and beat the undisputed hardest game of the year. Most games don't actively make the game harder the more you fail. Most games don't hide half the content behind a system that'll take years for the community to piece together. The game's art style and story come from a Japanese company's melancholic spin on Western fantasy. The game's mechanics encourage cooperation with the messages on the ground, player ghosts showing you what others are doing, and of course the summoning system. People who were able to beat it in its earliest days in a land unformed, shrouded by lack of wikis, held a sort of gamer trophy and a sense of superiority that couldn't be found elsewhere. A small, tight-knit community formed, the kind that breeds passionate participation. A spirit which still thrives in it today. The atmosphere of this game is immaculate. Miyazaki was famously inspired to switch careers because of the game Ico, and you can definitely see parallels in the lonely, forgotten landscape. Towering achievements of architecture and culture reduced to rubble. Immediately you're greeted with a sense of isolation in a foreign world. This decaying tower looming over you, that exists for a purpose you'll never understand, with a demon's lair at the top. Or how about the smithing grounds, drenched in warm sunset, a kingdom silently silhouetted in the far distance as the mindless workers dig ore endlessly for the tyrant king? Or the Boletarian city, once grand, the pinnacle of elegance and culture, now deserted and war-torn? The Valley of Defilement, where disease and filth coalesce in raggedy slums? And of course the Lovecraftian nightmare of the Tower of Latria, where the unfortunate inhabitants are turned into horrible abominations, with a giant heart beating at its center. This game deserved a remake. Bluepoint's overhaul changes the game in a few ways that make it much better than the original. For example, the annoyance of the item burden system is at least cushioned by the fact you can now send items you don't have room for straight to Stockpile Thomas. This is an amazing change. No longer are you forced to leave items behind because adding another leaf to your backpack is just too much to bear. I think the original intention was, when you ran out of space in your inventory, to equip the Ring of Herculean Strength and immediately turn around and go back to the Nexus to offload unneeded items. Just another step in slowly making progress in a level. But few people in their right mind would sacrifice their hard-earned progress just to get another potentially useless item. So you would generally just leave either the new item or an old one behind. It was an awful system that was rightly outed in the sequels. I was disappointed when I realized it was still here in the remake, but again, this small change makes it much better. Another change is omnidirectional rolling, which most people listed as a bare minimum of what they wanted to see. Rolling is no longer a treacherous gamble, and it makes the game's combat feel much smoother. There's more to get into in terms of what the remake adds, but I'll leave that for a bit later. For now, it's time to get into what Demon's Souls doesn't do so well. The biggest mess-up in my opinion is the online system. Co-op and PvP is one of my downright favorite aspects of these games, and I was excited to get to experience the online portion of Demon's Souls. Where is everybody? Here's a question the community has been asking. Is finding anybody to play with impossible because nobody owns a PS5 yet? Or is it because the online system is straight up broken? Only time will tell. It feels like it has gotten a bit more populated lately. But there's a few reasons I believe the multiplayer aspect isn't going to last nearly as long as Dark Souls 3. Let's start small. The message system is broken. 90% of the messages you find will have thousands of upvotes. A lot of them are useless. Funny, but useless. As you play the game a second time through, you might notice you're seeing the exact same messages you saw before. You'll even see the exact same messages while watching other people play on YouTube. You might also notice that most of the messages you left behind haven't gotten a single upvote, probably because they never even appeared in somebody else's world. So basically, 10% of the messages are getting 90% of the upvotes and appearing in everyone's world, while 90% of the messages are only appearing 10% of the time. Bluepoint needs to fix this. Dark Souls handled this incredibly well. You'll occasionally run across a highly rated message, but most of them have between 0 and 30 upvotes and are ones you'll never see again. There's also the problem that there's a few too many funny options that really smudge the intention behind the system, which is for players to offer advice and telegraph secrets through messages with a limited vocabulary. As the series continued, your potential messages became more verbose and detailed. Ironically, this made them much less useful, as now people try to convey their message in more abstract terms and hope you get the gist. Having access to a few options means each is more purposeful, and short messages that get right to the point leave less room for misunderstandings. It seems like at least a third of the messages scattered around the remake are on par with "try-tongue butthole," or "thanks for reading," "happy birthday," "a little upvoting never hurt anybody," or just "hi." I like these messages. I think they're funny and it makes you feel connected to a larger community of fun-loving people. You're not alone in this dreary world. But it becomes a problem when it feels like that's the majority of the messages you're seeing, rather than legitimate hints or warnings. Next, the level range is way too restrictive for a game where any player could potentially be in any area at any level. You're free to do them in the order you choose. This means the player base is scattered all over the in-game world. In Dark Souls 1, most people are going to be around level 40 to 50 when they reach Anor Londo. You can count on this. Whereas in Demon Souls, the average levels of players in any given area is going to be all over the place. The AI of the bosses is also absolutely not equipped to deal with 2 or 3 players. From what I've seen, they completely bug out. Also, most bosses in this game are super easy. There's just not much incentive to return to human form and summon when there's only a couple bosses that give you trouble. And reliable soul farming in 4-2 means there's not much incentive in waiting around to get summoned, beyond the fun of it. That's just how the game is, but it is a factor in how many people are going to participate in co-op. And finally, the biggest mechanic that conflicts with the multiplayer is the tendency system. Tendency discourages everyone from participating in online play for a multitude of reasons. Let's take it from the top. What is the tendency system? Well, if we believe the back of the box, tendency is meant to make your choices within the game have consequences by triggering different events, items, and enemies depending on your tendency state. But then again, the back of the box also says that you have the choice to progress with the story or chart your own path through the open world. Regardless, I think this is a decent description of what tendency seeks to do. Make your actions matter and reward or punish behavior accordingly. The problem is that this is a total mess and easily the worst part of the game. Dying puts you in soul form. Being in soul form halves your entire health bar. You remain in soul form until you either use a very rare item or defeat a boss, which restores your health and enables you to summon help, but also opens you up for invasion from other players. You can also restore your human form by helping or invading others, giving the online system a more utilitarian incentive. And that's a pretty cool dynamic, right? But hold on. Each of the 5 areas in the game all have their own world tendency, which ranges from pure black to pure white. If your world is pure black, extra difficult enemies will spawn in inconvenient locations, and the enemies that are already there will become tougher. And, I didn't know this until I thoroughly read the wiki, you'll have less health while in soul form. To supposedly balance this out, enemies in pure black worlds will apparently drop better items and more souls. Purely white worlds will give you a much easier time, giving you access to secret areas, NPCs, equipment, etc. weakening the enemies and strengthening your attack power while in soul form. I think it's pretty clear which one you're supposed to aim for. World tendency depends on very specific actions you do in each level. If you kill a boss, specific black phantoms, an invader, or a primeval demon, your tendency shifts towards white. If you die while in human form or kill friendly NPCs, your tendency shifts towards black. Come again? What shifts the world towards black? Dying in human form. It doesn't take many mistakes to wind up in a significantly harder version of the level. Rewarding players for playing well is one thing, but kicking a man while he's down is another. Having the player's health bar would be way more than enough incentive to encourage a player to get good and play cautiously. It would also encourage players to return to human form and participate in the multiplayer. But the game just heaps way too many debuffs on top of that. Let's say a new player is careless and dies 7 times in human form while trying to beat a boss. Their world is now pure black, and on top of having 60% less health, the enemies hit harder, likely one-shotting them. There are now black phantom enemies that have 3 times the health and deal 3 times the damage of a normal one, and the player will be doing less damage to them. Pick one, Miyazaki. That's 5 major debuffs. There comes a point that has been reached by many over the years, where new players will just quit the game because this kind of thing makes it seem unfair or inconsistent. Players who are familiar enough with the game to avoid death aren't rewarded as much as they're kept from the game-breaking punishment of letting a world reach black tendency. So, the goal is to not let the world reach black, right? That would be very bad. What's the most effective way of doing this? The most common method is to simply avoid human form altogether by putting on the Cling Ring, which reduces the health penalty of soul form, and killing yourself in the Nexus every time you beat a boss. Most first-time players are going to do at least a little homework and do this. They're going to stay in soul form for the entire game, thereby completely missing the entirety of the multiplayer mechanics. Why go into human form to summon when it opens you up to dangerous invasions and means that, if you die, the game will get harder? Why put down a blue sign to get summoned if the only extrinsic reward is a few souls and being returned to human form, which, again, increases your risk of dying in human form, and giving yourself a slew of problems? And invaders? We'll get to invaders. On top of world tendency, there's also character tendency. Your character becomes more white as you defeat invaders and 5 specific phantoms that don't respawn and only appear in pure black world tendency. A pure white character will gain 20% extra attack power as well as their summons. They'll also get access to a ring that gives them more damage as a blue phantom. Your character's tendency moves towards pure black when you kill NPCs and invade players, something that is really very easy to achieve. Characters with pure black tendency have 10% less health while in soul form. The one upside is they get 20% more attack power, but only when invading other players. Let's take a hypothetical look at an invader with pure black tendency versus a player with pure white tendency. Let's say, for the sake of argument, they have identical equipment and stats. The invader invades. Right from the get-go, he's in soul form and his opponent is in human form, meaning the invader has 35 to 60% less HP, depending on whether they're wearing the Cling Ring. The invader can get a 20% damage advantage, but only if they're wearing the foe's ring. The host might have 1 or even 2 summons, however, and hypothetically, if both phantoms have white tendency and are wearing the friend's ring, both of them do 20% more damage to the invader, with a 40% damage buff overall. There's a chance the invader will receive backup, but it's not guaranteed and really not even likely. Up until the most recent patch, and this is completely whack, if an invader died by falling off a cliff, they lost a soul level. Excuse me? What? Thankfully, Bluepoint changed this, but holy crap, being an invader sucks in this game. Not only are they on unequal footing with the person they're invading, not only will invasions last forever because people can quickly heal as much as they want, but it makes PvE harder as well. If a character with pure black tendency is playing on a pure black level in soul form, guess what? 70% of their health bar will be gone, and they'll be doing 20% less damage against more enemies that hit harder. If I'm wrong about any of these numbers, please tell me in the comments. This just comes from experience and what I've read on the wiki. So with all of those disadvantages that comes with invading, what are the rewards? There are none. None. There aren't any. If you successfully kill the host, you return to your human form. You don't even get souls. Blue Phantoms get souls for clearing the level, and before the latest patch, got souls for killing invaders too. There is literally no incentive to go out of your way to invade in this game beyond what limited fun you can find in engaging in PvP with the worst hit detection I've ever seen in any game. Not to mention the fact that because dying in human form has dire consequences, most of the people you invade will simply pull the plug as soon as they see you. This literally happens all the time. Invasions are a mess. Multiplayer is a mess. The sequels drastically changed how the online works, and for very good reasons. Summoning, being summoned, and invading is still a lot of fun, which is why players do it despite the downsides, but the game's design is actively fighting against it. The game is literally designed for the multiplayer to die out. These are the problems that come with remaking the first game of a long series while keeping its design 100% the same. These things and so many more were vastly improved in the Dark Souls series. It's possible Bluepoint will patch some issues out in the coming months, but issues related to the core game design, like tendency, are definitely there to stay. The tendency system is the most frustrating thing I've probably ever had to deal with in any video game. It works exactly as intended, and it's intended to be as convoluted as possible. Listen, the amount of secrets and extra content hidden around the game dependent on tendency is really awesome. Like, I totally appreciate that. I can't imagine how cool it must have been to discover something completely out of the blue, and then to reverse engineer exactly what conditions led it to happen. Take primeval demons, for example. These big blob things, they only appear when your world tendency is one step above black, in specific locations on one level of each archstone. That would have been awesome to naturally run into. This goes for the rest of the tendency-specific content as well. Black phantoms, NPC quests, small secret areas, that's amazing. The problem is that these things occur only in very specific conditions that are a massive headache to intentionally trigger. The epitome of this problem are the ancient ceramic coins added in the remake. Okay, so players discovered a locked door behind an illusory wall behind a lock gate in an alley that nobody has any business snooping around in. What? That's amazing. For a few days, nobody had any idea how to unlock the door until somebody discovered an ancient ceramic coin that only appeared in Fractured World mode and only in Pure White World tendency. Players scrambled to find every one of these suckers, which within a couple weeks, they did. 13 coins are hidden in very obscure locations around the game within Fractured World mode. Some only appear in Pure Black tendency, and some only in White. Collect them all, give them to Sparkly the Crow, and
something happened. Brilliant, right?
You get a key that unlocks the secret door, leading to the indisputably coolest armor set in the game. I want to rock these threads. You want to rock these threads. Haters be jealous. This is the ultimate Demon Souls trophy that you get to wear with pride. The only problem is that if you want to go hunt down these coins, you're gonna run into some resistance. World tendency will be the bane of your pitiful existence. In order to find all these coins, you have to first get White World tendency in every area by beating every boss. Enter Fractured World mode, take a good long look at what weird corner of the map you need to get to, and acquire the coin. After doing this for every level in Pure White tendency, you need to get Pure Black tendency. This is most easily accomplished by jumping off a cliff 7 times in human form in each archstone area. Only problem is that 7 stones of ephemeral eyes wasted for each of the 5 archstones equals 35 stones. These babies are much rarer than humanity, effigies, or embers. In total, you can find about 40 of them if you exhaust every square inch of the game and do every questline. I found that number online, but in practice, I never had more than about 15 at once. So, you'd better be frugal with them, or you're gonna have to spend a while either farming or being summoned. By the way, good luck with that. You're also going to have to be careful because if you do the wrong thing, like kill an NPC you're not supposed to by accident, or if you're careless and go into human form and die too many times, you can absolutely, by accident, lock yourself out of Pure White tendency. After every area is as black as night, you can go ahead and spend another few hours studying the wiki to get them all. Congratulations! You're now in possession of all 13 ceramic coins. Mission accomplished, right? Well, halfway. You see, there are 13 coins in the game, but you need 26 to get the key. That means you gotta do it all over again. But this time, in New Game Plus. As a side note, New Game Plus in Demon's Souls is much harder than in Dark Souls. It's more rare to find enemies that don't one-shot you while in soul form. And remember, every area is now in pure black tendency, meaning the game is significantly harder. Of course, you're going to be able to get a couple black tendency coins right off the bat, but as soon as you kill a boss, that area won't be black anymore, meaning you once again have to kill every boss in the game for white tendency, collect the coins, then once again waste 7 blue boys per archstone to get all the black ones. Now with 26 coins in your pocket, you can march right up to Sparkly the Crow, hand over the dosh, and earn yourself a trip to Locked Door Alley. Suddenly that armor set isn't so attractive after looking at the price tag, huh? If you're one of the few people who can actually do this, you deserve all the gamer points in the world. I respect that. But I challenge everybody watching this to go try this and see how many coins you can get before you start hating the game with every fiber of your body. My limit was 5. My first couple playthroughs before I started doing all the completionist stuff were heaven. I was totally comfy calling Demon's Souls my new favorite game of all time. But after struggling with world tendency for a couple dozen hours, I'm a little too exhausted with the game to call it that. I need a long break. I need to never see this screen again. Here's my advice. Keep the tendency fiddling to a minimum. Don't be too worried about it. Play the game naturally, enjoy the multiplayer, don't you dare look at that wiki page, at least not for a while. And when you inevitably wish you could experience half of the game's content, draw out a detailed plan of how you're gonna handle tendency. Make it organized. If you don't, you're in for a real friggin' headache. I love this game. This is a great friggin' game. Let's talk about all they added in the remake. Graphics. Oh me, oh my graphics. Wow. This game looks good. I cannot emphasize that enough. This double compressed YouTube video cannot convey the detail of this world. It's straight up weird playing the older games now that I've seen NPCs with such detailed facial animations. It's also awesome to hear the same voice actors play the same characters 11 years later.
And thus begins my final, eternal rest.
Never have I actively appreciated the sound design of a game. Not on this level. From of acquiring souls to of the Kathunker, the sound adds so much weight, so much grounded immersion to the combat and exploration. The original game feels a bit weightless, especially in soul form as it makes your footsteps and rolling have zero sound. But the animations and audio design in general feel much less grounded than its sequels. The remake fixes this big time. The music is also incredible. Apparently people actually enjoyed listening to the old, basic synthesizer boss themes of the original. I don't mean any disrespect, their simple compositions are charming and fit the world. I kinda like them, and I really like a few tracks. But compared to the new ones, well, the new ones are more like... The subtle and unique rumbles in the controller when doing anything from attacking to picking up an item make you feel so much more connected to the game. The audio coming from the controller's itty-bitty speakers mixed with the sound from the TV to create a sense of three-dimensional audio. All of these things combine to be the sensory equivalent of crack cocaine. They do wonders for immersion. Quality of life improvements like the aforementioned ability to send items to storage or omnidirectional rolling are great. I love the HUD and the equipment screen. Not having to use soul items individually is a godsend. I like the new emotes too. Loading screens are practically non-existent. It's amazing to be able to go from the PS5 dashboard to playing Demon's Souls in under 30 seconds. The noticeably longest loading screen in this game is from the Nexus to the smithing grounds, which only takes about 7 seconds. Otherwise, we're probably talking 3 seconds or so. There's a new photo mode, which I love. For the first time in Soul's history, you're actually able to pause the game and take pretty pictures while you're at it. Here are just a few that I took. There are 9 visual filters that change the look of the game. Don't like the dreary overcast weather of the Boletarian Palace? Put on the bright filter. Want the game to look more like the original? Use the classic filter. Want the game to send a shiver up your spine? The winter filter has you covered. Great for repeat playthroughs to spice up the visuals. Not every filter looks good in every area though. The optional Fractured World mode flips the entire game, including your character model horizontally. Your right is now your left, and your left is now right. As you can imagine, this is absolutely brain-breaking for somebody who knows the level design. One thing the remake screwed up is the weight of healing items. In the original, healing items weighed very little, and were the same regardless of quality, and you could carry up to 99 of each. The remake further limited the amount of each you could carry at once, which is good, but they also made higher quality grass weigh a lot more. This means your character's inventory is constantly going to be getting full if you're carrying too much grass. This was totally unnecessary considering they already limited the amount you could carry in the first place. Why make having healing items in your inventory an inconvenience? Overall, this remake is amazing. Bluepoint knocked it out of the park. But somebody had to spill a little mustard on this pristine white shirt. If you pre-ordered the game or bought it on day one, you get 2 weapons that weren't in the original game. The Digital Deluxe Edition comes with a soundtrack and a few extra items, including 2 new armor sets and a ring. The armor sets are completely exclusive to the Digital Deluxe Edition. Presumably, I'll never be able to rock these sick threads, since there's not even an option to upgrade after going with the standard. There are 24 armor sets in the game, as opposed to 77 in Dark Souls 3 and 106 in Dark Souls 2. Many of them are hidden or gender exclusive. 2 cool-looking armor sets are kind of a big deal in this game. And the ring? Well, getting all the rings is required to get the Platinum Trophy, so they couldn't make it totally exclusive to the Digital Deluxe Edition. So they generously allow you to trade an item with Sparkly the Crow to obtain it. Which item, you ask? Oh, Pure Bladestone. Infamous for being the rarest item drop in the entire game. That's just mean. Thank you, Sony. It's a money-grubbing tactic that's exclusive to video games. A few items and a digital soundtrack don't have any inherent value, yet you're expected to fork up 28% more cash to get to experience the luxury of one value being changed in a .ini file somewhere. I don't like it. I don't blame Bluepoint, but it feels icky nonetheless. In my Dark Souls 2 critique, I sort of went through each area and boss and gave my thoughts on them. There's not a lot to complain about in this game's level design, so it's going to be more subjective and definitely more positive. I'm going to talk about them in order. Let's give it a go. The Forlorn Outpost is a fantastic introduction to the game. It's one of the most visually interesting areas and has great pacing as you approach this massive structure from what seems like the sewers, then slowly make your way to the top. The narrative climax of entering the boss room and getting wrecked by this terrifying demon is such great payoff. As a tutorial, it's very effective at teaching you the basics. It starts you off with a single enemy that can't fight back, then ramps up the pressure as you go from fighting 2 draglings to 3. You get ambushed on this staircase, you get a little practice fighting archers and common soldiers, and even a couple blue-eyed knights, though the AI of the enemies is definitely in baby mode. I didn't actually know this until I watched my friend play a little bit, but you can't die until you reach the boss. I'm guessing most people don't notice this, either being good enough to avoid getting hit too many times or assuming they escape death by the skin of their teeth. Not letting the player die too soon is important for the story, and also adds an even bigger sting when you get one-shot by the Vanguard demon and realize you don't get a rematch. You were supposed to die. If you're good enough to beat the boss, you get some extra goodies including the OG fluted helmet, which is a great touch by Bluepoint. But you don't get off too easy. The message is clear. If you think that guy was the hardest thing you're gonna fight in this game, think again. You're gonna die. A lot. I also appreciate that the tutorial is 100% optional for returning players. More games need to understand that slow pacing at the start can ruin second playthroughs for people who know what they're doing and just want to get to the good stuff. I never skip it though because I like it so much. The Nexus is a huge otherworldly shrine that now stands empty, except for a few poor souls who've moved in, occupying its many dark corners, and a young maiden who keeps the candles lit, and a little cancer baby up in the attic. Great atmosphere, great hub. After a while it feels like home, but the feeling of wonder never wears off as you gaze with starstruck eyes at the magnificent architecture. You'll be spending a lot of time here as you upgrade weapons, sort your inventory, attune spells, and stock up on items. Its cast of characters feel like more than animatronic vending machines. Each of them has a backstory and plenty to tell you about themselves and the world at large. Seeing the Nexus's lonely halls fill up with more characters as you rescue them is great. Gates of Boletaria is the only level available to you after the tutorial, so you can basically consider it the tutorial part 2. You don't get the benefit of baby AI this time though, and you're likely to die a few times as you learn the layout. One thing Demon Souls is very fond of doing is making you manage multiple enemies at once. This is clear straight from the get-go. If you don't take it slow, you can easily be overwhelmed by hordes of dreglings and later soldiers. There are 2 shortcuts to open up, and the boss fog is conveniently placed near the start of the level, teaching you to look out for this kind of thing. Many enemies in the Boletarian Archstone drop healing items like candy, but it's still quite easy to run out if you're not good at the game. Maybe a lesson on item farming was intended. There's 2 instances of NPCs hidden behind breakable objects, teaching you to really pay attention while exploring. The treasure-hoarding dragons act as a good test of skill for the returning player, and maybe a wake-up call for the overconfident newcomer, as well as a lesson that it's a good idea to save some areas until you're stronger. The dragon burning the bridge is a cool set piece, but it's annoying that it doesn't do it unless you're standing in just the right spot for just the right amount of time. It feels cheap and fake and will likely confuse new players. The first boss introduced to the player apart from the Vanguard Demon is the Phalanx. Clearly a very different fight. It definitely reinforces the lesson that you should get used to multiple enemy encounters and rewards utilization of the tools given to you. Sure hope you saved your pine resin and firebombs though, because if you didn't, you're in for a long fight. The Lord's Path is a straightforward and short level that builds on the dragon's set piece from the previous level. It's essentially a straight line. You have to run from one gatehouse to another, avoiding the dragon's fire. You do have 2 options, however, in that you can choose to run between them up top or avoid the dragon's fire by using the path underneath. But that has its own dangers. Like, for example, 6 dogs. 6 dogs. Probably better to just use the upper path. You do have the opportunity to save Astrava's butt once again though, if you pay attention and talk to him at the start or explore the underway thoroughly. I do really like how you can very much tell what this level was used for in a realistic sense. There's abandoned carriages and carts from the massive gates all the way along this main avenue, all the way to the capital city with plenty of practical fortifications, though it's clear the kingdom has recently been rearranged to keep people or monsters or both out. Not that it's helped much, judging from the burning ruins of this ex-metropolis. The boss at the end of this path is the Tower Knight, accompanied by a platoon of archers. It's intimidating at first, but once you clear out the archers up top and learn to avoid his AoE attacks, you're free to hack at his ankles and topple the giant, making you feel godlike. Once he's dealt with, you learn that you need the soul of an archdemon to proceed. This teaches you that you aren't necessarily supposed to complete the levels in order. The smithing grounds differ from Boletaria in that you don't get the impression these guys are actively defending anything. These lizard people will just keep mining all the livelong day. They're just trying to do their jobs, and you're a real nuisance. The enemies are tricky because they have very high defense against everything but magic and piercing attacks. But it's not hard to figure this out considering the developers literally tell you this. This is a good way to encourage the player to try different approaches and see what works rather than brute force with the same tactics over and over. If Boletaria taught you about grass farming, this one teaches you about farming upgrade materials.
Slithering. Watch out, watch out, watch out, watch out!
The area's boss is the armored spider, which sits stationary, blocking the end of the tunnel. It shoots fast webs that have to be perfectly dodged, or else you'll be slowed down and ripe for a fireball in the face. When you get close, it has only a few attacks and gives you an opportunity to whittle down its health, until it decides it's time to cover the ground in oil and force you to run to the back of the tunnel. This boss is meant to teach you to not only rely on shields. The webs and fireballs are going to take a chunk of health off unless you learn to dodge them. Its up-close attacks are fairly easily rolled away from, but blocking will most likely take off all of your stamina. Once you've squashed the spider, you reach the tunnel city. Immediately, you have a choice between left and right. Left leads you from the winding tunnels to a more open space with a cavernous, lava-filled vista. It's here you meet Patches.
Ooh, you're not mad like the rest, are you? Well, what jolly travelling companions are we? Pleased to meet you. Call me Patches.
And fall for his easily escaped trap.
Who'd have thought it? Bear bugs. My apologies. It's just not your day. As promised, the treasure is all yours. If you survive, that is. Good luck to you.
Some players might be tempted to kill him now, but he's definitely more useful if you keep him alive.
You? You're no joke, are you?
These rockworms are extremely weak to magic. At the end of the area is more tunnels that are super easy to get lost in. You can spend tens of minutes going around in circles before you either find the exit or the right way to the boss. If you went right at the start, you'd find a large pit that can be platformed down without too much trouble if you're careful. But your character's tendency to bounce off any edge they hit while falling can make this nightmarish. Going down the pit acts as a shortcut to the boss, available for use right from the start. Reaching the bottom leads you to the Flame Lurker. Flame Lurker's AoE attacks that he spams have giant hitboxes that either require a nice big shield with a generous amount of fire defense, like the one found by the dragons in 1-1, or extremely precise rolling. Killing this guy is a squishy mage in New Game Plus with both black character and world tendency was not a fun experience. His little hops do damage if you're too close, half of my health bar at the time. This is one of the toughest bosses in the game because of his large hitboxes and relentless aggression, though you'll notice he leaves plenty of windows of opportunity for you to strike back. Once defeated, you're led to the Shrine of the Dragon God. I find this boss quite frustrating. The remake's visuals make this quite the spectacle, and it's over pretty quick, so I don't hold too much animosity towards it. However, this boss requires extremely specific and arbitrary timing. You have to run to the right, break the pillar, immediately run to the left to avoid his fist, immediately run to the right and break the second pillar, then dash through as soon as he moves his other hand. Any variance and you will be one-shot by the mighty dragon god. You run to the left to avoid his first punch, but if you run to the left on his second punch, it will hit you no matter what. This is a case of malevolent inconsistency, or artificial difficulty, or maybe just incompetent design. Why does his punch always hit you if you run to the left on his second strike, but not the first? It's impossible to tell, that's just how they programmed it. Why is his hand so freaking fast, and why does him lazily resting his arm on the side of the arena do more damage than a literal full power punch? This fight doesn't encourage mastery over any mechanic. It simply requires that you try and try again until you memorize the pattern and make it through. You activate 2 spears that pin him down and slash at his chin with no resistance until he's dead. Congratulations, you just scored your first Archdemon soul. The Prison of Hope's main feature is its thick atmosphere of dread and horror. Mind flayers stalk the narrow corridors. Prisoners beg for freedom from the cruel torture they must endure. A woman's haunting tune can be heard throughout the building, and a man screams for help in the distance. The increased sound fidelity of the remake does wonders for this area. Here's a comparison between the original. The level design tasks you with reaching the bottom of the prison tower by finding keys to open locked gates. When you do, you'll find a horrible monstrosity and an intimidating trap. This arrow trap either requires you to pick up another key and go the long way around to disable it from the back, or take courage and roll through each barrage of arrows, which there's a nice little achievement for. The boss at the base of the next looming tower is the Fool's Idol. Like Pinwheel, but better. She splits herself into several clones that fire magic arrows at you. They're signs that telegraph themselves on the ground for a moment before becoming invisible that stun you when walked over. The main challenge is finding which one is real before they get shuffled again. Another trick to this boss fight, one that's easy to forget about if you're experienced with the game, is the fact that the boss will be continually revived by this piece of garbage if you don't find him or get the hint that he must die.
What do you want?
It would definitely be an annoying experience to finally reach the boss only for it to be impossible to kill. Death is inevitable in this situation, unless the player knows you can just quit out to spawn outside the boss room. It may be annoying, but again, death is part of the game. It's literally tutorialized. Dying multiple times is just part of the process of proceeding through a level. It's a good twist to the boss, a memorable oh crap moment for the player, a mistake that's never made twice. Disregard everything that man just said. You can simply walk back through the fog, which is nice but inconsistent with the rules of the rest of the game. Then you have to run all the way up to that guy's room and murder that man. I'll just let that play out for you so you get the full experience.
What do you want? I am but a humble servant. I do not wish to interfere. I won't cause you trouble. I won't.
Then you have to kill the boss again. Cool. Upper Latria takes narrow corridors to the extreme, this time allowing you to fall to your death. In the center of the map is the giant tower with a beating heart. The goal is to make it fall by releasing the chains that hold it. Gargoyles will ambush you and fly away to avoid your attacks. Shields are helpful in that you probably don't want to risk rolling off the edge, and ranged attacks allow you to hit gargoyles that slyly remain in the sky, once again encouraging you to diversify your build, and have backup weapons for tricky situations. You can find this little fella named Yurt who looks and acts suspiciously evil.
I am on your side.
But if curiosity gets the better of you and you let him go, he'll head back to the Nexus and start systematically killing your favorite characters.
Thank you. I will remember this. I am certain we will meet again.
A while after you free him, a couple fresh bodies show up that lead you to his hiding spot where you can stop his spree.
I am indebted to you for your help in Latria. Without it, I would not have made it back. Now, I can go on with my work. And for that, thank you.
After releasing both chains and watching the big fleshy thing go splat, you realize that it was producing the monsters the whole time, and you now get to traverse the narrow walkways with a few extra obstacles in your way. At the top of the central tower is the Man-Eater boss fight. This is one you might want to summon for, as after getting the first one down to half health, another flies in to wreck you. But if you have a friend with you or are just that good, you can kill the first before the second one shows up. These guys don't mess around. They lunge at you to push you off the path and fly away to fire magic. Thankfully though, this does give you opportunities to attack one by itself while the other screws around in the sky for a few seconds. Fighting two bosses at once is tough and probably discouraging for new players, but definitely doable. The Ivory Tower houses the Old Monk, which is nothing more than a fight with an invader who can't heal. It's cool in that you have the ability to become someone else's boss, and this reinforces the idea that the multiplayer, including PvP, is a major aspect of this game. Invaders don't get any special rewards for doing this. It's the same as a standard invasion in that you get nothing. And it's sad that so soon after this game's release, I was getting the same one guy over and over. Apparently the only guy in the world who wanted to invade in Upper Latria. He had so many regeneration buffs stacked it was literally impossible for my crappy weapon to kill him. I had to switch servers. Another playthrough, I didn't get anybody to invade. The game just gave me the offline NPC, which was easy as heck. This is why invaders need incentive to invade. Getting ganked by a host and potentially two phantoms with no ability to heal and no help from mobs is not fun. Especially when you have to wait a couple minutes each time for the host to even reach the arena, sometimes dying to one of the two Black Phantom Mind Flayers on the narrow staircase outside the boss. It's not a particularly fun boss to fight either. The only positive thing to say is that this boss fight is creative, and it is creative. There aren't many games out there where you can be somebody else's boss fight, and so I do appreciate it, but it's not handled very well. Island's Edge is a great level. You get the opportunity to fight this roly-poly Skeletor one-on-one before you have to fight two sets of two. It's definitely a sharp difficulty curve, but bring a shield to block the roly-poly's rollies, and they aren't so bad. Luring 1 out of 2 isn't that hard either if you have a bow, and at this point you should be aware that you need a good variety of weapons at your disposal for situational purposes. You finally get to have a rematch with the Vanguard Demon if you're feeling brave. Or you can go around him using
Secret tunnel through the mountains. Secret tunnel, yeah.
The first one is fairly well telegraphed with a staircase leading right into a brick wall, and there's no doubt somebody will have left a message telling you to hit it, and finding the secret tunnel isn't necessary for beating the level anyway. So including this awesome illusory wall mechanic to hide secrets is just another way to blow your mind when you figure it out. In the secret tunnels are more roly-polies, this time with no chance to dodge their rollies. This combined with the arrow traps send a clear message: get a decent shield if you don't already have one. One thing that's going to be very frustrating for players with big weapons is that your weapon will often hit the side of the tunnel, making it very difficult or impossible to hit them. This, however, does not apply to your enemies. Once you've either killed or eluded the Vanguard Demon, you advance to some narrow cliffs with shiny Skeletors blocking your path, and sky stingrays pelting you with glass. This is foreshadowing what you're gonna have to deal with in the next level. These stingrays are annoying and unpredictable, with attacks you most likely won't see until your face is filled with sky glass. But it is possible to snipe them out of the sky, so maybe that's what you're supposed to do, I don't know. Guarding the boss fog is an extra greasy weeaboo straight from Oklahoma that can be run past very easily, though getting killed by him at this point is no doubt frustrating. The boss of the area is the Adjudicator, whose major weakness is poking in the belly and moving slightly to the right when he swings his big boy knife. Staying on the upper platforms is probably the harder option since his tongue is less telegraphed. You can either snipe the little birdie whispering dark thoughts to him, or poke him until he falls down and smack the birdie up close and personal. I don't know why they only gave this guy like 3 attacks, but he's easily the least difficult boss in the game. If you do manage to get hit by his one swing that takes 3 minutes to wind up, you'll probably die or something, though I don't have personal experience with that. The ritual path is where you'll want to go when you inevitably run dry on healing items and could use a few level ups. Right at the start is a perfect vantage point to shoot the Grim Reaper. When he dies, so do all of his ghost friends, netting you about 4,000 souls. Right next to the vantage point is a merchant who sells healing items and arrows, so I think FromSoft knew about this little trick. In the back of the hall is trusty old Patches.
Oh, the demons haven't got to you, have they? I'm in luck. Go on, have a look.
Who kicks you down a well. In the well is Saint Urbane, miracle vendor.
God will cleanse us of evil.
Continuing forward in the level, you're forced to navigate extremely narrow cliffs while being pelted by arrows and sky glass while being assailed by roly-polies. Using a bow to kill them from a distance or soul remains to distract them is your best option. Heading back inside, you'll probably be killed by these ghost guys who fire a laser at you on a narrow staircase that really can't be dodged. In New Game Plus and beyond, this thing will absolutely kill you in one hit if you don't wear any sort of magic protection. I didn't know this until my New Game Plus 2 playthrough, but using soul remains to direct their attention elsewhere makes this part easy peasy. The boss of the area is the Old Hero, an intimidating fight made simple with the use of the Thief Ring. He's blind, you see, and using a ring that eliminates your sound makes him very easy to kill. The Monolith Forest is home to the Storm King, a giant stingray that has to be brought down by the mighty Storm Ruler. This thing's range is pitiful compared to its Dark Souls 3 counterpart, meaning you have to stand right under your target to hit them. The music and the visuals and the sound in this fight just might be the most impressive display in the game. This fight, along with the Dragon God, emphasizes the true power of an archdemon by requiring you to use external artifacts to bring them down, reinforcing the idea that there's no way you could kill one if the only tool at your disposal is a stick to poke it with. I love this fight. The visual and audio experience is just all-encompassing. The Depraved Chasm is the worst level in the game, which is, you know, my opinion and stuff. The high-quality level design and visual fidelity is as strong as ever, but I say it's the worst purely because of its annoying enemies, the bird-nosed hobos. The game's idea of ramping up in difficulty is providing more opportunities to fall off a narrow walkway. This level is at least 60% narrow walkways, and its bread-and-butter enemy loves to shove you. If this doesn't land you at the bottom of a cliff, it'll kill you in 0.3 seconds as they gently push you, which does 5 times the damage of a normal attack and can't be rolled out of or blocked once the stun lock has begun. There is no reason this should be doing so much damage. It's literally just a single shove. Why does it hit you 5 times? The fact that this is clearly just meant to push you off a cliff whenever the AI feels like it is bad enough. But if you're smart enough to avoid compromising cliff positions, you're still screwed, because of the sheer power of this enemy's outstretched arms. If this one move was more telegraphed and damaged you once rather than 5 times, I would not mind it. The only shortcut is dropping off a plank to skip a small portion of the level. The boss of the area is a giant piece of crap at the bottom of a giant toilet. You can either flush yourself to the bottom and hit it with your stick, or shoot arrows from above while avoiding its poop projectiles. Either way, by the end of the fight, you'll be wondering, wait, what just happened? The toilet's dim lighting and the boss's general lack of any coherent form, along with its pitifully weak attacks, means you won't be getting a sense of what that thing you just killed even was until New Game Plus. Leechmonger's 2 tricks up its poop sleeve is its ability to heal and drain your health by covering you in leeches. If it had more HP, this might be a problem. It, however, does not and therefore is not. It's also very weak to fire, and with the amount of pine resins you'll have gotten from the bird-nosed hobos, you're in the money. Congrats, time for Swamp. The Swamp of Sorrow is a fitting title for this area as you trudge through poisonous goop. The platforms lead you down a linear path, but you're free to run out and explore the swamp. There's plenty of items hidden around, and you can even approach this encounter from a more advantaged angle. The remake added the Elden Ring, which can be found in 3-2 in pure black tendency. It's not too much of a hassle to get, and it makes this level so much more enjoyable. As it acts like the rusted ring in Dark Souls 1, which lets you run at full speed through goopy terrain. Without the Elden Ring, you'd have to slowly walk through the mud, unable to roll at even the slightest depth of yuck. You then traverse some more narrow walkways and try to survive one of the worst ambushes in the game, where about 5 of the bird-nosed hobos come out of literally nowhere behind you. This is another case of malevolent inconsistency. You cannot see or kill these guys before they come out. This ambush is not telegraphed whatsoever. There's no logical reason for 5 hobos to be chilling in a wall. This is the developers wishing death upon you because this is the Swamp of Sorrows, and you're meant to feel sorrow. Watching this makes me feel like I'm playing Dark Souls 2. Going forward, you're led back into the swamp, where you'll notice a strange and unnatural deluge of slugs. Look up and you'll see a cocoon of slugs, which can be cut down to reveal the large Sword of Moonlight, the coolest weapon in the whole game. Here's a sad story though. On my Faith character, I ignored this sword because I figured it would be of no use, thinking I would save it for my magic run. To my utter despair, I found out too late that the large Sword of Moonlight is a Faith weapon in Demon Souls. Don't let this happen to you kids. Check the wiki before planning your entire build around a weapon you can't use. You're then led into another shantytown with 1,000 more bird-nosed hobos and this mean old price-gouging lady. All jokes aside, this lady's prices are ludicrous. Most merchants' prices in this game seem to be balanced around New Game Plus and beyond, but this lady's rates in particular are nasty, especially considering the fact that the bird noses only drop 13 souls apiece.
Curses. I wasted my breath on you.
Further into the shantytown, you'll find a long path that leads all the way back around the map to the start, where you can kick a plank to earn yourself a nice shortcut, which is great because otherwise you'd have to hike through 15 miles of sludge with 100 choke points to prevent running past enemies to get back to the boss. Dirty Colossus. It shoots flies at you, which prevent you from rolling. Cool. Weak to magic and fire. Put some pine resin on your stick, poke it a few times, and it's dead. The problem with Dirty Colossus and Leechmonger is that they come right after the least pleasant 2 levels in the game, meaning most players will save them for the last. The bosses, however, feel like they're balanced for early game characters. Maybe the developers wanted to give you a break. Who knows? With the less than inspired designs of the prior 2 bosses, you'd be forgiven for assuming the Archdemon of the Valley of Defilement would be a big brown monster of indeterminable substance swinging slowly at you. But no, it's one of the most memorable bosses of the series. The pure maiden Astrea sends forth her noble knight from amongst a heap of disease-ridden corpses to defend their rotting haven. You, the greedy-eyed demon slayer whose goal is recontextualized by this fight, brutally slay the kind maiden and her knight in the name of more power. One of a few late-game twists the game throws at you. The soundtrack of this boss is widely considered to be the best in the game, and I happen to agree. I'm no expert in music, but it adds so much intensity as you rip apart what little these people have built in the name of compassion. You have the choice of going right and sniping Astrea from afar, in which case Garl Vinland collapses to the ground, his goal to protect his maiden failed. Or you can kill Garl first, who dutifully blocks the passage, and Astrea, with no option but defeat, relinquishes her soul with spite.
You killed him, didn't you? Very well. I can no longer resist you. Do as you like. Take your precious demon soul.
This is the most narratively driven boss fight, and definitely meant to be saved for the end of your quest to kill each archdemon. But you're still able to kill them in any order. With each of them dead, let's return to the Boletarian Palace. The Inner Ward and the King's Tower are my personally favorite levels. The in-game description of the Archstone of 1-3 and 1-4 put it best. Inside Boletaria's gates, where the streets intertwine, lie traps set by the much-reviled fat officials, themselves living proof of old King Alan's madness. The King's Tower, once a symbol of Boletaria, stands ravaged by the claw marks of drakes, while silver-haired old King Alan sits on his crumbling throne, witness to the desolation. These streets certainly do intertwine, with wide boulevards lined with mansions and narrow alleys set with traps. A gate blocks your path, meaning you have to take the long way around and open it. Along the way, you're beset by archers and red-eyed knights. This fat official drops a key for an inconspicuous locked door back in 1-2, which, if found, leads you to free Bjor of the Twin Fangs. There's another fat official in the dungeon who drops a key to a gate hidden in an alleyway in 1-3, which hides both the locked door added in the remake as well as the tower where Yuria the Witch is imprisoned. To free her, you have to disguise yourself as an official.
Too short for a stormtrooper? Huh?
Once the main gate is opened, you keep heading towards the giant tower, the one you've seen since the first level, now closer than ever. Guarding the boss is a final defensive line comprised of several soldiers, archers, and 3 red-eyed knights with spears. The spear knights have way too few weaknesses. Their attacks can't be interrupted because they block during their entire charge attack, which can kill you in an instant, and there's 3 of them, meaning you have to painstakingly lure one out at a time with arrows and use a shield to block their charge if you want to deal with them safely, or, at all. Or alternatively, you can just run past them without much trouble at all. There comes a breaking point in these games where the player no longer wants to deal with the enemy encounters and just figures out how to bypass them. Which, as a side note, I think this is the playstyle they legitimately designed several boss runs in Dark Souls 2 to be about, because holy crap. Demon Souls in particular discourages this with enemy choke points, but in this case it's probably the only good option to safely re-challenge the boss. The Penetrator's attacks are wonderfully telegraphed but very easy to avoid. That's okay though, because both he and his boss arena are gorgeous. It's a one-on-one duel between you and Boletaria's champion. Well, not if you rescued Bjor, who comes in to lend a hand, making the boss even easier. This is one of my favorite fights just for the spectacle and satisfaction received from downing such a distinct and intimidating opponent. It's the final push. You're at the king's front door. In front of you is 3 black phantoms, the spirits of the 3 champions you've killed to get here. This is a very tough encounter, fittingly so for the end of the game. The only problem I have with it is the discount Tower Knight here with his scraping spear, the worst weapon in the whole game. This guy not only dishes out high damage from behind his shield, but also breaks your equipment incredibly fast. Not fun. Heading upwards, you have to run past some dragon fire just for old time's sake. The remake added a handy shortcut that lets you circumvent the first section. Bjor distracts the dragon if you freed him, which is helpful. At the base of the king's tower is Ostrava, who finds himself defeated once again. He gives you a key to his family mausoleum and then dies. Then he comes back as a black phantom 5 seconds later to show just how truly useless he was all along. Back in 1-1 is the locked mausoleum, guarded by a red-eye knight you probably got wrecked by when you were a newbie. Inside is old King Doran, who demands you show him your strength. He's protecting the sword Demon Brand, which Ostrava recommended you use to kill the king. Its damage output depends on your character tendency. If you've been killing invaders and abstaining from invasions yourself like a good little boy, you're in the money. If your tendency is black though, the sword is literally less than useless. Though you will soon find Soulbrand, which is the black character tendency equivalent, though it won't be soon enough to carry you through the hardest boss in the game. King Allant is fast and furious. With a variety of quick attacks, a devastating AoE, and great range, he's guaranteed to wreck you a few times, if not a dozen on your first playthrough. To your dismay, you may find your soul level getting drained by his grab attack, reversing your hard-earned character progress. This is the final challenge of the game. They don't hold anything back. Once he's dead and you thought you've won, you're in for a surprise.
How did you defeat my demonic reflection?
The real King Allant is chilling with the old one underneath the Nexus, and you're about to meet both of them. After one of the coolest cutscenes in the series, you find yourself underneath the Nexus, face to face with the Old One. Its appearance matches its title. There's no disappointment to be found here. There's only one thing left to do. Enter the Old One and take the king down. Inside, you don't see anything resembling the proud king you just fought. Instead, you find his drained and deformed husk, warped by the Old One's corruptive power. The final boss of the game is the most anticlimactic, one who can barely manage to swing a sword.
You fool! Don't you understand? No one wishes to go on.
With him out of the way, you have a choice. Embrace the Old One and replace King Alent, dooming the world to death by way of endless soul-stealing demons, or let the Maiden in Black lull it back to sleep. The game makes it very clear which one is morally correct. You just beat Demon Souls. What a journey. If ever a game deserved a second chance at mainstream success, this was it. Demon Souls began From Software's now signature style of storytelling, marred by its dull start. The opening cutscene is a boring and overlong exposition dump, the kind that makes your eyes glaze over. But it does give you some background about the world and a few of its characters that is important for understanding the specific context of the story. In the original game, it was nothing more than a concept art slideshow. In the remake, the improved visuals and sound of this slideshow makes it more entertaining, but chances are you're only going to watch it once and quickly forget about it. The exact same goes for boring exposition dump slideshow number 2 recited by the Cancer Baby. At least they let you experience the actual game before the second one. The majority of the narrative experience doesn't come from these cutscenes, but instead from the interesting blurbs on each archstone, dialogue with its various characters, and most impressively, the world itself. Taking in the atmosphere of each level is what'll truly let you in on the story. The desperation, the destruction. A gray fog is enveloping the land of Boletaria, now the epicenter of a slowly expanding invasion of demons. Long ago, the paganistic monumentals awakened an ancient being, the Old One. It was eventually put back to sleep after much bloodshed, of course, and through the ages was forgotten about. King Alent, ruler of Boletaria, discovered the Nexus and the heretical soul arts, and purposefully awakened the Old One once again, his intention being to destroy all life on Earth, to end the suffering that is existence. Only through your courageous persistence can the 6 archdemons be slain, gaining you enough power to meet the Old One and decide the fate of the world. It's a solid narrative that takes the back seat to gameplay with plenty to uncover and speculate on. Dark Souls would famously hide most of its background information in item descriptions, but the item descriptions here are pretty tame and the story itself much simpler. Like many aspects of the game, the sequels would build upon the obscure story, world building, and themes to great effect. It is a testament to this game's quality that with only a single iteration, just a couple years after Demon Souls released, From Software made a masterpiece. But there was clearly a lot to improve upon. The healing system, for one thing. Instead of infinitely farmable grass, allowing you to spam full heals like there's no tomorrow, Dark Souls opted for the Estus Flask. Estus Flasks were very limited in quantity, but refilled at every death or rest at the bonfire. The required amount of farming in general was lessened in Dark Souls, though farming upgrade materials was in some cases necessary. Demon Souls had 13 weapon upgrade paths, each with their own unique upgrade material that was completely useless if you were going to use a different weapon type and in too short supply no matter which one you chose. This was cut down to 11 paths in Dark Souls 1 with only 8 types of materials. Dark Souls 2 further simplified this by only having 3 categories of upgrade materials, with elemental infusions for more specific builds. This system was brought back in Dark Souls 3. This streamlining is smart in that it didn't remove the depth and customization from upgrading. Standard weapons can still be infused with the same effects as before, but it only requires a single item to do so instead of making each infusion its own unique path. This eliminates tiresome material farming and encourages experimentation with all of your infusion options. Bloodborne went all in on streamlining this process by only having one upgrade material that works for every weapon, encouraging you to pick one and stick with it. Elden Ring has only 2 types of upgrade materials, one for standard weapons and one for special weapons. Infusions are freely swappable through the Ash of War system, further encouraging you to switch things up to tackle the trial at hand. Ironically though, the upgrade system was bungled a bit because of the fact it's way easier to upgrade a special weapon with somber smithing stones than it is to upgrade a standard weapon. This makes absolutely no sense to me. Special weapons only need 1 somber smithing stone per level, meaning you only need 10 items to max it out. Standard weapons, the ones that are less interesting and generally less powerful, but are more customizable, require 9 different types of smithing stones, and you need 12 of each, totaling 97 items to max out your weapon. I'm pretty sure requiring only 1 somber smithing stone per level was a decision made very late in development, because sometimes you'll pick up multiple somber stones at once, which is overkill. This would only make sense if the game originally used the same Twinkling Titanite level curve from previous games. But maybe that didn't really work out, seeing as there's 9 different levels of somber smithing stone, and balancing out how much of each you would find in an area would be more difficult. Still, the system sends players who want to upgrade a standard weapon all over the map to just barely find enough materials. And it's easy to miss the part of the world where you're meant to find, say, smithing stone 3s. And so you eventually start finding smithing stone 4s and 5s, while your weapon remains underleveled. Whereas players with special weapons will find more than enough materials, usually scattered around key locations. I think a solution would be to ditch the differing levels of materials just like Twinkling Titanite and simply have generic smithing stones. You could still require the same number of materials you need to find, but then it wouldn't matter where in the world you went, you'd always find materials useful for you. It's interesting that Dark Souls 2 and Bloodborne went backwards rather than forwards in terms of their healing systems. Dark Souls 2 has purchasable life gems in addition to the Estus Flask. Bloodborne's system is definitely more reminiscent of Demon Souls in that you're going to be doing a lot of farming for bullets and blood vials. Bloodborne's combat is clearly a lot faster, more frenzied than Dark Souls. The rally system encourages you to act fast and take risks to reclaim your health. Blood vials dropping from enemies reinforces the idea that you have more options to recover from mistakes and keep fighting. Elden Ring, ironically, is a game that might have benefited from going back to a farmable moongrass life gems or blood vials system, seeing as it's open world. The Estus Flask system doesn't work as well when it's not built around smaller, more linear level design. That's why there's a Sight of Grace shoved into every spare corner of the map, and there's flask replenishing beetles all over the place. You need to be able to refuel your Estus Flask very often. But if they had simply used the system most other open-world RPGs use for healing, i.e. purchasable or farmable potions or life gems or blood vials or whatever, they could have had more freedom in the way they designed the open world and could have made you engage with it more. Maybe rely more on the crafting system. However, this would have messed up the balance of the linear legacy dungeons. So really, it makes sense they chose to do it this way. The boss fights of this series have certainly evolved over the years to be more reaction-based and complement a variety of builds, rather than being based around preparation and exploitation of specific weaknesses. Each boss in Demon Souls offers a very different challenge than the last, even if that challenge doesn't quite reach the rage-inducing heights that would be achieved later in the series. The goal is to test your skills and give a final climactic send-off with an appropriate flavor for the area, and they definitely accomplish that. I think it's telling that no game after Demon Souls gave the whole tendency thing another try. Dark Souls 1 has humanity, which is a limited resource that governs certain resistances and ability to return to human form, but that was the closest they got. Restoring your humanity can only be done at a bonfire, which gives invaders a bigger window to enter your world, instead of allowing you to return to human form right at the boss fog, negating any risk of invasion. Dark Souls 1 does have the problem that being in human form is never necessary. The only advantage is that you can summon help, which comes with the disadvantage of opening your world to invasion. A lot of players will simply never restore humanity, especially if they're new and don't really understand how it works. You do have to restore humanity in order to kindle bonfires, though, which is a smart way to occasionally force the player into opening themselves up to online play. Dark Souls 2 brought back the mechanic of death limiting your HP, but made it gradual. Dark Souls 3 did this best. In that game, being embered gives you a significant health boost, which is different than severely punishing you for not being in human form. For the first time, you're encouraged to be embered as often as possible. Defeating a boss automatically embers you, just like Demon Souls. But this time, there's no tendency system to encourage you to run off the nearest cliff. This means that more people are going to be open for summons and invasions than ever. Multiplayer participation has never been higher than in Dark Souls 3. There's also plenty of covenants that offer unique rewards for helping and especially invading other people. which is a big upgrade from literally nothing. And this is why there's thousands of people still active in that game coming up on 5 years later. Elden Ring did this the worst by far. In order to summon other players and be invaded in Elden Ring, you have to use a feral calling finger remedy, an item you have to craft. They're so cheap and easy to make, it doesn't even make all that much sense to gatekeep it behind the crafting system at all. Why not just have it be a reusable item you can turn off or on whenever, like the items used to be summoned? Anyways, you never, ever have to use a feral calling finger remedy in this game for anything other than summoning other players. They have zero effect out of opening you to online play. No buffs like Dark Souls 3 and no necessities like Dark Souls 1 and 2. You can completely ignore them. You're never forced into it after beating a boss like in Demon Souls or Dark Souls 3. This means that invaders have an even smaller pool of people to invade than ever before. There are no covenants and therefore no special rewards for engaging in co-op or PvP. Why would you summon somebody else in this game in the first place? It's as fun as ever, yeah, and players are potentially a lot better than an AI partner, but they're also potentially a lot worse. Players can die in a few hits, whereas AI summons are tanky to compensate for their stupidity. Summoning for a boss fight increases the boss's health by 50% and decreases the amount of runes you get by something like 25%. The rune penalty is harsh but makes sense, as it theoretically encourages you to help someone else beat the boss afterwards to compensate. But looking at summoning as a whole, summoning somebody to help you with a boss makes it more difficult, and there's no guarantee that your partner will survive past the first 5 seconds of the fight. And you get less runes as a reward. Not to mention you have to use an item and wait around to see if anybody is even available for summoning. But why even summon an AI at all when you have Spirit Ashes? There are a ridiculous number of Spirit Ashes, letting you fine-tune your strategy for a fight. Using Spirit Ashes does not increase the boss's health. Some Spirit Ashes are way more powerful than even an AI summon, and using them doesn't lessen your reward for beating the boss. Elden Ring is lucky in that it was incredibly successful, and it's very replayable. So by sheer numbers of people who still play it, you'll probably be able to engage in its online systems. But there are less reasons to do so than ever. And that's pretty baffling to me considering how well they did it in Dark Souls 3. One unique aspect about Demon Souls that I love is that it encourages you to use many weapons throughout your playthrough. No matter what your build is, if it's too specific, there's gonna be an area where it sucks big time. Each world's enemies have strong defenses and exploitable weaknesses. Experimentation is required to figure out what works best in each individual level. Preparation is a large aspect of the gameplay. For example, upgrading a simple spear will make 2-1 much easier, and the Crescent Falchion from 4-1 is a more than serviceable weapon to kill Flame Lurker with. Bringing a decent bow will make 4-2 more manageable. The Dragon Longsword in 2-1 is a great weapon to use in the Valley of Defilement, as everything there is weak to fire. In the Valley of Defilement, you'll find a lot of items that'll be useful for Faith builds, and Faith builds have many counters specifically useful for that area. Mages will want to go to the Tower of Latria first, but will need to use different tactics as everything there is resistant to magic damage. Strength builds should go to the Burrow Archstone first, as you can easily acquire a Crushing Battle Axe and later the Dragon Bone Crusher, along with a lot of upgrade materials for physical weapons. This aspect of preparation was lost as the series continued, and is largely a product of its non-linearity. There are a lot of unique aspects that kind of faded as the games progressed, but of course, many were added. Elden Ring actually outshines Demon Souls in this regard, something that I think has gone underappreciated by a lot of people. You'll encounter challenges so tough that you might need to switch up your entire build, respec your character, use a different weapon, craft items that exploit weaknesses. You can beat the game with any build you want, but some things are definitely more effective than others against certain bosses. The game gives you a giant toolbox full of different strategies to use. The more you explore, the more you'll find materials and weapons and crafting recipes and spirit ashes and ashes of war that will help you in specific scenarios. Some people get upset that their build can't steamroll the entire game and actually have to think and readjust their approach. But this element of preparation and exploitation of weaknesses was something sorely missing in these games, and I am so happy it's back. It is not perfect though. The problem is that some things are overpowered. Get a decent bleed weapon, use the Mimic tier, and there are a few enemies in the game that won't roll over for you. This makes a lot of people feel they have to play with a very specific build to be effective, when the intention is to give you a larger variety of options than ever before. Dark Souls 1 ditched the idea of a level-up lady and de-emphasized the hub. Necessary changes due to the game's large, interconnected world that has to be traversed by foot, which, for some reason, hasn't been replicated in Dark Souls 2, 3, and Bloodborne, them opting for more level-up ladies and disconnected hub areas. Demon Souls' method of disconnected levels that could be done in the order you choose was never truly replicated either. Dark Souls 2 got the closest, giving you several paths to go down that eventually dead-end. Dark Souls 3 and Bloodborne are more linear than either Dark Souls 1 or Demon Souls. Demon Souls was a fantastic game, a bright beacon of creativity released during an onslaught of homework copying, by-the-books, uninspired slogs. A hardcore action RPG with slow-paced combat and little room for error. A brutally challenging experience that brought players together with its unique online mechanics and multitudes of secrets scattered throughout its excellently designed and amazingly atmospheric world. A game totally remastered with breathtaking visuals and enhancements to its core gameplay by Bluepoint. Was it perfect back then? No. Is it perfect now? No. It's got its fair share of problems, but it is a must-play for those who want a deeply engaging, incredibly original game that's full of ideas and zero compromises. Each level is so diverse, each boss offers a completely different challenge and experience than the last. Variety in character builds, mechanics that are hard but possible to master, an engaging multiplayer system, and hundreds of secrets make this one of the most replayable games ever. Demon Souls deserves every bit of praise it's gotten over the years, and will go down as one of the most influential titles in video game history. And thanks to Bluepoint, you now get to see it preserved in all its weird glory and next-generation graphical fidelity. I love this game. You should play it. Thank you for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this one. My name is Jabik, and I hope we meet again.